Hi, everybody. Dr. Friedman here, and we have finished the first week of the Actual Play Honors Research Seminar. It's such an interesting time to be recording this video and, quite frankly, teaching this class. This class met at 11 o'clock Central Time, simultaneously with Wizards of the Coast's announcement of D&D 1, or 1D&D. I'm tired and have only briefly seen notification, and thanks to Josh Simons for live tweeting so that I was able to kind of glance down and contextualize some of the relevant news that was coming down the pike, as literally I was teaching the history of Dungeons and Dragons and why 5th edition D&D is so important to the history of actual play. There have been several booms of actual play in the short time that it's been highly visible online. There are older antecedents, and we will talk about those. But for now, talking about D&D and talking about the rise of actual play is almost essential to talk about the way that 5th edition really lit the fire. And so the other thing that lights the fire of the D&D boom is the tool set D&D Beyond, which is now owned by Wizards of the Coast. When I last taught this class only a year ago, I was pointing to it as a local treasure. Of course, it was developed initially here in Alabama, about 4 hours north in Huntsville. The integration of Wizards into D&D Beyond means that the tool set is going to be even more central to the experience for a lot of players. In fact, when I asked students who had created a character for Dungeons and Dragons before if they'd used D&D Beyond, everyone who had created a character had done so at least some of the time in D&D Beyond. And so for those who are new to the system, they were also new to D&D Beyond. And I used exploratory time, I literally told them to break it. Do whatever you want, make whatever you want, explore a character. And luckily the class is exactly 12 students as of today, which means that they fit into a single campaign invitation that I can set up with my master account in D&D Beyond. Hey guys, it'd be really nice if I could do this for a 20 to 30 person class, just FYI. So we made characters, and along the way, it became a source of discussion as experts in the room explained things like encumbrance or different kinds of features. There were questions even from experienced students about what legacy means. And of course, that's because changes are coming. And so D&D Beyond has to be a tool set that increasingly accommodates different source books, some of which are officially authorized and are current, and some of which are being relegated to legacy. And of course, explaining what homebrew is and a little bit about what critical role content means, but that's next week mostly. It was a fun class, and although the dominant part of class was actually the first half of class, where we finally got to run one of my favorite exercises, Eugenia Zorowski's Where Do You Know From? And it's an exercise that takes students through the questions of what are their intellectual commitments and curiosities? Where did they come from, both in and outside of the academy? What is their research and work for? And who are they responsible to and serving? I guided students through each of these sets of questions using a PowerPoint slide deck, basically transmuting Gina's questions onto slides, giving them about 2 minutes to meditate on each of these questions while kind of music for airports played in the background. And then as a final synthesis, I asked them to prepare a sentence or two to share with the class of the parts of their answers that they were comfortable sharing. And I riffed myself as a kind of model before that, explaining that I am an 18th centuryist by training and have been very interested for my entire career about the way that the 18th century is the origin of so much good and, quite frankly, evil in the modern Western world. The 18th century helps me understand the present, which is why as I now return to the things that gave me pleasure all the way back from when I was a teenager, I'm doing so in a kind of conversation with different media cultures of the past. That's only a fraction of my commitments, the communities I'm responsible to, or any of these sorts of things. However, it's a good introduction to a snippet relevant to share with the class. More will be shared, I'm sure, in the fullness of time. And if any of them start following me on Twitter, then much more will be shared in the fullness of time. It was a great exercise that took a little over half of class. And it was a true revelation, I think, to all of us. It's important to note that this exercise should not be used to force students to disclose anything that they're not comfortable with. And yet, the class is small enough that we were able to entrust one another with some things that I think that they would not normally mention in class. And I don't mean traumatic things. I mean just kind of quirky things that you might not think of as necessarily relevant to a particular class. I think it's notable that this is a almost entirely STEM group of students who are nevertheless curious about humanistic practices. Which makes for a really interesting tension and combination. I adore this group of humans already. So we made some busted characters. We talked about some of the things that are coming down the line. We will talk more about the mechanics of D&D, especially next week when we talk about Critical Role and Acquisitions Incorporated and their roles in the kinds of early booms of actual play. And of course, both have resonances all the way down to today, and both of them have been incorporated, so to speak, into the worlds that are officially supported by Wizards D&D. So there'll be more richness to explore. This is kind of the taster, both of those things. The other thing that I was very clear with my students, and I want to be clear with you about, is that in the previous version of this class, if you watch those vlogs, you'll know that I put off D&D in the previous version of the course about as long as I possibly could. And I don't know that that was a mistake, but I think with actual play in particular, and with the state of tabletop role-playing game scholarship more generally, you can't escape having a base knowledge of D&D. It would be a disservice to the roughly 25% of my students who have no background in D&D to put off addressing its mechanics, its drawbacks, its history until later. You simply can't do it. D&D is the 1,000-pound gorilla in the same way that Critical Role is an enormous part of the actual play landscape. That's not to say that we're not going to look past those horizons. In fact, very important for us and for me to get quickly past just looking at D&D. But we do need to kind of get a shared grounding. So we watched Matthew Mercer play for about 52 minutes, his one-on-one shot with Stephen Colbert, which I particularly like not only because it's short and well edited, but also because as part of the kind of dialogic level of gameplay, we hear a little bit about the difference between 5th edition D&D, which is what they're playing at the time, and which Stephen has to learn because he hasn't played Dungeons & Dragons in many, many years. So we get a little bit of a sense of the tension and the differences between the different generations of play in this respect, even though these are men that are not actually that far apart in age. Just different preparations. We also looked at Alex Chalk's working chronology of D&D and pop culture, which is from 2018, but still covers an enormous amount of the kind of relevant history of both actual play, but also the other ways in which D&D has been present in media, from, say, episodes of Community to beyond, Stranger Things, those sorts of things. It will, of course, need to be updated because more is happening all the time. The D&D movie trailer was, of course, mentioned in class by more than one enthusiastic student because owlbears are valid. We are also making available inside of our learning management software other kinds of introductory information. I'm a big fan of Matt Coville's Running the Game videos as a way to introduce concepts to students who are new to Dungeons and Dragons. I think that's going to be incredibly useful for these particular newbies because many of them are coming from backgrounds of more competitive styles of gameplay. It's going to be very interesting in the fullness of time to see what these folks who are, of athletic backgrounds or from other kinds of competitive play styles, what happens when they take a look more closely at the way that actual play isn't really competitive. It's collaborative in many kinds of ways. Which isn't to say there isn't sports ball in there as well, as we will talk about next week. Next week is an incredibly self-indulgent week because it's my birthday and I do what I want. On Tuesday, we will be reading 2 of my pieces written for very different audiences, but about the same moment at the end of the first campaign of Critical Role. One, Fantasy Friends, wasn't even published when this class was last offered, and in fact, student feedback helped shape the final form of it, which came out on Valentine's of this year, 2022. It's an essay designed to give a reader an experience of a feeling or feelings around actual play and what it's like to watch it in the particular affordances of the moment we are in. On the other end, we'll look at my first article book chapter about Critical Role, Is It Thursday Yet?, which is about narrative time and compression. You can find that in the McFarland collection that is on Tabletop Role Playing Today, that was edited by Jennifer Grueling and Stephanie Hedge. It was one of the first to come out. And it was followed quickly by this book, which we will be taking a look at in week 3, Watch Us Roll, essays on actual play and performance in tabletop role-playing games. Both of the McFarland collections that came out in the same year are overwhelmingly D&D centered. Watch Us Roll has more Critical Role content. The Hedge and Grueling edited collection has more Adventure Zone content, including an interview with Griffin McElroy. We have not yet created, and again, this is my hobby horse, resources that look beyond to, say World of Darkness games and things like that. We're just not there yet, at least in these kinds of edited collections. But that's a discussion for a different day. For now, it's getting students' feet wet with D&D, which is, still, as I say, the major player. So Tuesday is Critical Role without watching Critical Role. They will watch the now delisted but still available video by Matt Coville on the what he calls the climax of Campaign 1 of Critical Role. And then on Thursday, as a treat to myself that I cannot stop being excited about, as I've mentioned, Kate Welch will come and talk about the different performance experiences of different formats of actual play. And this is my opportunity for students to watch Acquisitions Incorporated in its many different formats, ending with the C Team, which of course was both a studio production on Twitch that was live, and then later was on Zoom because of the pandemic. But of course, it is the end of like a series of the evolution of play, starting with a podcast, which then became recorded convention performances, which then attempted to be kind of TV-like and tightly edited, in the same way, in a similar way to Harmon Quest of the same years, before kind of settling into the format that is dominant in part because of Critical Role. We'll talk about more about how that format came to be, because I have a piece coming out about that too. Ding. So that's the first week of class here in actual play land. And so we will be talking more next week about the course contract and research tasks, which will really pick up steam in week 3 when we actually start doing some hands-on research tasks. But we're still feeling our way in and vibing. And it's a long day today. I need to go. I'm recording this on Thursday. It will almost surely not be out on Thursday because the rest of the day is quite long. And this is when you can close this if you wish, but just to give you a sense, this is my long day, by which I mean I am now home recording this video. I will eat some lunch and maybe achieve some sort of state of rest before returning to campus one floor up to teach a graduate seminar on Austin and Games. There will be a separate recap video for that for anyone who's interested in how I'm handling that. And then that's a 3-hour course. And so then I'll have chance for, again, hopefully food and a little bit of rest before live tweeting Critical Role like it's my job, because apparently it is. So this may not be my smartest semester, y'all, and these videos may take a real dive on these Thursdays, or at least be a little bit more rambly, but we'll see. Feel free to ask questions in the comments, or you can reach me as always where I'm highly online, which is on Twitter at Fried, Friede, and have a great weekend.